I grew up with Star Trek, and The Next Generation was my first show in the series, so the idea that it would be continued in some way, as it has been with Star Trek Picard, was something I both craved and was a little afraid of. Is it possible that it could recapture the magic of the old show? So much has changed since then, with the world, with shows in general. An optimistic show about exploring the galaxy for the sake of satisfying our curiosity seems like an alien concept nowadays. I loved Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It was probably my favorite series of the franchise, but it was also the show that wanted to explore something darker. Darker isn't bad, and Deep Space Nine did it in an extremely well-written and executed way, but it is distinctly different than The Next Generation. The problem, if you want to call it that, is that modern Star Trek has further pushed those darker tones, turning the franchise into something about action and struggle rather than hope and curiosity. The result is a show like Star Trek Discovery, which is a fun watch and at times an interesting watch. I enjoy that show for what it is, but what it isn't is The Next Generation. It's not close to recapturing those themes, but to be fair to Discovery, it doesn't seem to me like that's where its focus is. It wants to be something different, and to its credit, it does that alright. That brings me back to Picard though. For this show, I didn't want just alright. I didn't want a show that's just fun action, with just enough substance to it to give that action some weight. I wanted something that pays tribute in some small way to those childhood memories I'm so fond of. And what I got in the first episode? Well, I'm not sure what I got in the first episode, but let me try and break it down. First off, Star Trek Picard is not Discovery, not in its presentation or priorities. There is action in the first episode, but it is absolutely secondary to the story. There are big stakes presented almost immediately, but the story still takes time to slow down and focus on the character moments. Almost all of those character moments focus on Picard himself, but that makes a lot of sense in the context of the first episode. We've been away from Picard for a long time, and in some ways, he's a changed man. It's absolutely appropriate that the show's first priority is getting us reacquainted with him, and it does that without compromising the pacing. In fact, I'd say that while Discovery is paced perhaps too quickly for most scenes to be given enough weight for it to ascend beyond just spectacle, Picard doesn't suffer from that problem at all. I go as far as to say that pacing is perhaps the first episode of Picard's greatest strength. The show also succeeds in being interesting and dark without compromising the essence of who Picard is. So it dodged my single biggest fear, that this show would present us with a protagonist that was Picard in name only. Certainly, he has baggage that he's coping with, but the essence of who he is hasn't changed. In fact, you could argue that the single biggest thing he's struggling with is that while the world has changed, while Starfleet has changed, he's remained the principled man he always was. In a way, this first episode presents us with the perfect allegory for the state of Star Trek as an entertainment franchise. What the franchise is and how it's portrayed has changed so much since The Next Generation, but who Picard is remains unchanged, perhaps as a relic from a different time. That all said, Star Trek Picard, at least based on the first episode, will not try to be The Next Generation. The pacing is good, the show is well presented and written, and the story is interesting, but this show isn't an optimistic take on the future. It doesn't look like exploring strange new worlds or seeking out new life and new civilizations is anywhere on the menu for the show. The focus here is narrow by comparison. That doesn't make it bad, it just makes it different. It appears that, despite the nods to the past, this is not a show that wishes to indulge my nostalgia or serve in any way as a continuation of the themes of The Next Generation. But if I accept that and look at the show on its own merits, what I'm left with is a first episode that was well written, well paced, and presented me with an interesting storyline. Picard might not be my ideal of what I'd like Star Trek to be, but it is a show that I want to see the next episode of as soon as it is out. And at the end of the day, that means the first episode did its job. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this show to anyone who enjoys Star Trek, either the new, more action-oriented take on it, or the older, more upbeat series of the past. Which also perhaps suggests that in some ways, this is the best of both worlds. That'd be high praise, and I don't feel like I can quite say that after just one episode. But why don't we watch and see where this takes us?